Hello, Kim Knight here from The Art of Health, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic, the cycle of health, in our What Creates Illness series. And I love talking about this topic because what I'm going to share today could literally revolutionize and transform your understanding of illness if you've not heard this before. So I'd like to start with a question. What do you think happens when you get symptoms and when you get ill? Do you think the body has made a mistake? Do you think that symptoms are a mistake? Or do you think that the body actually might know exactly what it's doing? Because whichever viewpoint you take will alter dramatically your understanding of illness and how to approach illness, how to understand it, and how to know how to get well. So I'm going to start off by explaining this cycle of health, which really is based on the traditional Chinese medicine principle of and understanding of yin and yang. So if you've heard of yin and yang, it's a way of describing how the universe operates. It has this balance, or should have a balance, of yin and yang, and there is no, they say that there is no absolute. We live in a relative universe where things can reach a maximum yin and then they turn into yang, and then if they get towards reaching a maximum yang, they're going to turn back into yin. And that's what this symbol here delineates or symbolizes. If you've probably seen it, the yin yang symbol, where there'll be half of the circle will be white with a black dot and the other half will be the black with a little bit of white. And that signifies that when something gets to its extreme, because there is no absolute in the universe, as soon as it gets to its maximum, it then turns back into the other. Now, this is what is happening in our body as well, because we are part of nature. We tend to forget that, but we are part of nature. And so we have yin and yang within us. And very importantly, our body needs to maintain homeostasis, which means balance. So for example, we're constantly maintaining acid-alkaline balance in our fluids in our body, and we have to stay within a set parameter to stay healthy. But we don't realize that's going on, but the body is doing that. And it's doing that in all the different systems of the body all the time. Thousands and thousands of chemical reactions and monitoring going on without us having to think about it in order to maintain homeostasis. So when we're healthy, we could say that that homeostasis is being maintained. But when we get ill, we've lost homeostasis, and this is, I'm going to explain how we lose that homeostasis and then how the body regains it. So what happens is we're in health and then something happens which triggers stress. And the stress response is the sympathetic nervous system response, SNS, which I like to call SOS, and that stands for stress. And as I talked about in my stress video, and if you haven't watched that yet, go and have a look. When our body is triggered into the stress response, at a deep level, it feels that it may be under threat, and it will either be a real threat, such as suddenly you've had a car accident, or somebody just, an intruder has just come into your house, or you've just noticed that your house is on fire. That's a real threat to one's life, to being alive, to staying alive. And so the body automatically kicks into the stress response in order to deal with the emergency. So the emergency may be real or it may be perceived, but the response will be the same for the body. And it's basically trying to look after us. So it goes into the stress response and it will stay in that stress response as long as it needs to. But when it's operating in this stress response, that's a huge strain on the body. All the different systems of the body start working differently, and that affects us physiologically. And so it's like driving your car. I've said this before in one of the other videos. It's like driving your car up the motorway at 200 miles an hour in second gear. And we can only do that for so long before our body starts to break down. So we're putting our body under strain. So we could also write strain there, another S word. And then something happens which we call, at some point, there's going to be a regeneration trigger. And that is a trigger that triggers the regeneration, healing, recovery response in our body. And it triggers the body to go more into the parasympathetic nervous system response, which is the natural healing response of the body. And then we have to go through this phase because we're balancing. Remember, there's yin and yang. We've got to balance out. So we go through a phase of balancing, and then we come out the other side and we're back to health. We're back to balance. Now, what is really interesting in terms of illness and sickness is that this stage here, this regeneration phase, so we have the stress phase here, and we have the regeneration phase over here, triggered by the regeneration trigger, is that when we're in this regeneration phase, that is often when people have symptoms. So the body is actually recovering and rejuvenating and healing, but that is when the body manifests symptoms. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of this happening. The first example is, say you have a work project which is really, really stressful because there are deadlines, and deadlines always, create stress, and the shorter the deadline, the more the stress. So say you have a project which is requiring you to work 14 hours a day for 6 days a week for 2 months. And during that time, you're not really eating properly, you don't have time to exercise, you're rushing around, everybody's really stressed, and your whole body is put under stress. And you keep going, but underneath, at a physiological level, and at a mental level and an emotional level, there is a lot of stress being generated within the body. And at a deeper level, at some level, even though it's not a real emergency to your life, it's not a real threat to your life, your body is experiencing it as something similar to that. It's under strain. And then what happens is your project finishes, and that could be known as the regeneration trigger, because the project finishes and at last you can go, oh, thank goodness for that, I can relax. And maybe you just have a week off, or maybe you go on holiday, or maybe you're still at work. But what the body does is it says, okay, I've been under real strain for the last 2 months. I've just been asked too much has been asked of me, and I have to recuperate. And at that point it might succumb to, say, a virus or a flu, and you get sick. And this happens all the time. People busy, and then they go on holiday, and then they get sick, and then they wonder why. Well, this is why. So the body is bringing itself back into balance, and it's during this time that we get symptoms, and that's the time when we'll get the cold, we'll get the flu, we'll get the temperature and all the symptoms that go with a condition like that. And then as the body rebalances, that it comes out the other side and we're back to health. And the interesting thing is, during this regeneration phase, we can have what is called a healing peak. This little red line here, a healing peak, and that is when the symptoms will be at their worst. And that will be when we're just lying in bed, just feeling so ill with a massive high temperature, and that is the body really firing up to deal with, to overcome, whatever it's needing to overcome, the bacteria or the virus or whatever it is. And often at that point, that's when people can then go, oh my God, I need some help, I need some medication. And sometimes, we do need that. And it's not my job to advise at all on taking medicine. But it's just important to point out that it's not that the body is doing anything wrong, it's actually burning off what needs to be burnt off. It knows exactly what it's doing, it has not made a mistake, and it is in the healing response. It's in the recovery response. So second example, say you're in a relationship which is very, very stressful. Say you're not being treated well, and you're putting up with not being treated well, and you're constantly being emotionally talked down, put down, constant put downs, constant criticism and judgment and nasty comments. So that's more of an emotional thing rather than anything physical. Then, but although it could include physical harm as well. But again, if we're in a relationship that is stressful, then our body is going to go into this stress response. It's going to be under strain, and that will continue until something happens to address that situation so that it is no longer a problem. And there could be many ways that that could happen. I mean, for example, you could decide that the partner could decide, okay, I agree, I'm not being nice here, and I'll do something about it, and I'll go and see a counsellor. So that would be a regeneration trigger. Or it could be that you go your separate ways, right? There could be many different ways that this regeneration trigger could manifest. But the point is that once the body no longer feels in danger, and it can be emotional danger as much as physical danger, then the body goes into the regeneration phase. And at that point we can experience symptoms, and that could be a physical exhaustion or a physical crash, or it could be a lot of emotions coming up, because usually and often during this phase, often we're not completely aware of the emotions that are going on, which would be things like upset and hurt and anger and frustration. But our body is just in stress and we're trying to cope. And then when the regeneration trigger comes, then we start feeling everything that we hadn't felt before. And so we may experience a lot of emotions during this phase. But we will come out the other side, and we'll be back to health. Because our body is a specialist at bringing us back to health, as long as we understand the process and how to support it. And the third example, which is sort of similar, I guess, to the second one, is if somebody's bullied at school. This is so common. I work with a lot of clients, and there are common recurring themes as to why people get sick. And one of the common recurring themes is being bullied at school and not being able to do anything about that. So of course, that's a long period of time that's going on. It's not like a project of 6 weeks, you know, like in the first job, the first example I was explaining. Say somebody could be bullied for years, and that creates a huge build-up of emotions, a backlog of emotions. It's very, very stressful. The body literally thinks it's under threat, sort of physically as well as emotionally, and all the emotions get held inside, and emotions are energy. And they affect the body physiologically at a quantum level, and that is, we'll be talking about that in the quantum physics video. So what happens is the person keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, but just pushing and pushing and pushing until at some point, boof, they crash. And at that point, that's usually the point where people get a virus or a flu. And it's a flu or a virus that they just can't recover from, they just don't seem to get better from. And what is interesting is that they think that the reason that they're tired afterwards or have symptoms afterwards and are just never the same again after, they think it's because of the virus. But the virus is a bit of a red herring. The virus only came because the body's the immune system just crashed finally. But really the problem was whatever was going on here for maybe months or years before that. And then the body has to go into the regeneration phase. And often, say for example, in the work example and this example just now, is that when we're in this stress phase, we're also really depleting our adrenal glands. And that is what brings on, finally, in this phase, the adrenal fatigue, where the adrenals are just totally fatigued. So we have to go through this healing recovery cycle in order to get back to health. And what often happens is, if we don't understand this cycle and we're not able to pinpoint the phases, then we will get stuck somewhere along the line. And also what can happen is, if we're not dealing with those situations and resolving them, then there will be multiple things going on at the same time. And sometimes for some of them we'll be stuck in the stress phase, and for some of them we'll be caught up at the recovery phase, and so there's multiple things going on at the same time. So this is why we need to really look at our whole life and understand if we've got an illness and we've got chronic pain or chronic exhaustion, then we really need to look at the whole of our life and understand how the whole of our life has contributed to where we are now. And of course that's what I do when I work with people. So I hope this has been useful. Do write some comments below, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next video.